Yeah, the cat's gone, so I seized the opportunity to shut the door.
I like the way that you have to kind of. It's a matter of outsmarting this cat, Carl. You couldn't just pick him up and throw him out.
No, he hates human contact.
Really?
So it's not much of a cat, really.
Yeah.
Not ideal.
Yeah.
Not ideal.
Bless him.
But he's a rescue, so we didn't know that at the
Oh,
time.
okay.
They all look
Sweetly
adorable
rescued.
in the RSPCA.
It's a bit-
You're like, oh,
It's a bit of a lucky dip when you get a rescue one, isn't it?
yeah, bit.
You don't know what sort of background they've had.
No, though he's called Nike. I don't want to cast aspersions on people who name their pets after trainers, but yeah.
But they could have been naming him after a Roman god.
Yeah,
You
that's
don't
what
know
I
that?
was. Yeah, isn't it?
Yeah, he had a
unlikely.
brother called Andre.
Yeah.
Andre.
That seems on brand.
So I think that was a wrestler. Yeah. I don't know.
Well, you could say like a brother called Diodora or something.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Reebok.
Yeah.
Adidas. Yeah.
There you go. Yeah. All right, Alex. So when you're ready, we'll have a crack at this intro. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Rub some funk on it this time.
Okay. Hello and welcome to.
You sound like Alan Partridge.
That was more sleaze than funk.
Yeah.
We're honest.
Sorry,
That was...
it's a difficult balance.
It is, yeah.
Okay. Hello. No, that's wrong. Okay.
I mean, it was all right. It sounded
Was
good
it?
to me.
Was it hello?
Yeah.
It was only 2 syllables, but I liked it.
I know, I still got it wrong there, I feel. Hello and welcome to another episode of Armchair Opinions. Armchair Opinions is a blog where qualified philosophers answer questions asked by non-philosophers. Here on the podcast, we take a closer look at some of those answers. My name is Alex Impey. I am joined by Armchair Philosophers Carl Messenger,
Hello.
James Brown,
Howdy.
and our guest today, Mike Gregory.
Hey.
Michael is doing. Oh, sorry, I did that bit again. Jimmy, can you just like splice? Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Mike is doing a PhD. Oh wait, I think I talked over you then. Mike is doing a PhD at the University of. Oh no, how do I say it?
Just say Groningen. Groningen?
Groningen.
Yeah.
Groningen.
Yeah. Just how it sounds.
Groningen.
Hooligan.
Yeah.
Groningen.
Yeah, you
Okay.
can do it that way. That's how it's actually pronounced. But
I didn't want to offend anyone.
You're making this splice job quite complicated.
Sorry. I'll be really silent and then you can splice it.
Okay.
Mike is doing a PhD at the University of Groningen as part of the Universal Moral Laws Project and is especially interested in contemporary jurisprudence and republicanism. Oh God, okay. Under the microscope today is Mike's opinion about whether self-improvement comes at the cost of being true to oneself, written in response to a question from me, Alex Impey. Thank you, me. So, Mike, talk us through your opinion. Okay.
All right, that was good. I think that was really good. Yeah, I think that was fine.
Okay.
Also, just for before Mike talks us through his opinion, I think order-wise we'll go. So Alex first
Oh yeah.
for the questions, and then Carl. What was your question again today?
I am just taking issue with. It's just an idea that the desire to be authentic to oneself might be one of the self-same, universal, rational principles. I think.
Okay, cool.
So it's kind of trying to wheedle out a possible contradiction in the idea. So.
Okay, cool. Okay, do you want to go after Alex then? Do you want to go second, and then I'll go last? You happy with that?
Yeah.
Yep.
I mean,
All right,
generally,
cool.
I'm happy-go-lucky.
All right, fantastic. All right, good. All right then, Mike, you can talk us through your opinion when you're ready.
okay. And will you just tell me if I get close to talking too much or?
Yeah, so I mean, 3 to 5 minutes is okay
That should be fine.
is okay.
Yeah, I'll probably go through.
Yeah, so we're looking at the same time, like around about I'm not going to have to do maths now. Around about like when it hits like the 11-12 minute mark.
Okay.
Can you see the timer on your end?
Yeah. That's fine.
Yeah. So something like that, but it's not too much of a big deal. Yeah.
I think it'll be fine.
All right, cool. When you're ready.
Yeah. So I took the question. The question is a big one, but I tried to whittle it down to two main concerns, I guess, which is whether and what is the true self, and whether the true self, whatever that is, should be trusted as a proper guide for our self-improvement. And so Alex's question asked about this relationship between the true self and that self that comes about as the result of self-improvement. And this obviously assumes that there is something like the true self. It might turn out that there's not, that there's nothing sort of below the surface that that counts as the true self. And I pointed out in my opinion that if this is the case, then there's no tension between your self-improved self and the self you were before. All we're doing in this case is sort of fumbling through, going from one desire to the next. And so whatever desire you happen to have at the time would be a quote-unquote authentic desire. And so if there is no such thing as a true self, then I think this tension that Alex is feeling disappears. On the other hand, lots of people, philosophers, think that there is something that we can call the true self. And sort of my chosen candidate for this at the time of the opinion is something like an ideal self. So I pointed out that whatever the true self is, it shouldn't be identical with the self you are right now, because it has to be something which you can judge your actual self by. And so it has to be idealized in some way. And by idealized, I just mean made, stripped of certain external influences that we may think corrupt your reflective process. So, I gave the example of Alex being drunk and having the desire for Taco Bell, especially if she, previous to being drunk, had said, I don't want to eat Taco Bell anymore, and then I got really drunk and said, yeah, I'm going to go eat Taco Bell. We might say that Alex was not acting as her ideal self as drunk Alex. In other words, if Alex was not drunk, she would have not chosen to eat Taco Bell. And this means that whatever the true self is something that can act from purer principles, and I defined this in the opinion as more universal rational principles. And by that I just mean principles that are not contingent on particular desires in particular circumstances. So the fact that Alex is, drunk and a minute from a Taco Bell and really craving a Crunchwrap Supreme are all reasons that are influencing her to make a decision that she otherwise would not have made if she were to remove herself from those sorts of influences. And so the true self, I suggest, might be this sort of idealized rational self. And so what our true self is this this ideal self, and we ought to do what this ideal self would do, because we generally think it's better to act on principles that are more universalizable and therefore more objective. And what I mean by more objective is not dependent on things that lie outside of us, like our drunkenness or our sort of hunger, things that we can't control, things that are not a result of a unhindered reflective process. And so these principles actually end up being products of our true self and should guide our self-improvement. So if that's the case, then when we improve ourselves along these principles and discover through sometimes long and painful processes what principles we should adopt, we actually become more of our true self than our previous selves. So in self-improvement, we might actually be moving towards the true self instead of leaving it behind. And so that was sort of the conclusion of the opinion. Is that okay?
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's really good. So we'll go with Alex's question first. But please forgive me. I just need to nip to the loo very quickly.
I'm going to do that as well then if you
What? Jesus Christ! We just started. What's this?
Gave us a 18-point checklist to start, and
I know, right? It's like, ooh, have water nearby. Yeah, it's like it's the desert or something, and then all of a sudden, oh no, I just need the loo.
Yeah. I thought it was going to be like a
dear.
continuous thing, but if we can stop and stuff, but
They stop all the time, mate.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like
I guess it's him.
it's amateur
him in
hour.
editing that's going to have to deal with it. So yeah.
That's it. That's not our problem.
not
It's
my
fine.
issue,
Yeah.
So are
They not have Taco Bell in Holland? Then?
well, they in Amsterdam they do, of course, because everything that you
okay.
could ever imagine is in Amsterdam. But
Yeah.
outside of Amsterdam, I think there's only like 3 in the country, and 2 are in Amsterdam, and 1's in like Rotterdam or Utrecht or something. But yeah,
Okay. It's not. I used to live in Utrecht. It's not in Utrecht.
okay, yeah, I think it's in.
I would have hit it if it had been in Utrecht.
There was rumors of one coming here, but no such thing happened.
No. How far is it to Amsterdam?
2 hour
get the
train
craving?
ride. So it's ages in Dutch time. So they
Right, yeah, in European travel distance, that's forever.
They think of us as up here in the frozen sort of north, and don't really think of us as. But it's got a really good university, and it's a really pretty city, and you don't have to deal with.
Okay, cool.
All the terrible things that come with living in Amsterdam. So.
Right, yeah, sure. Yeah.
Okay. Feeling
All
good,
refreshed?
Alex?
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry
Had a
about
wee.
that. I don't seem to have any control over these processes at all. I mean, I can act in the most preemptive way, and then I'll have thought that I've completely emptied the tank, for instance.
Oh, yeah.
Only a minute only just before we started, and then lo and behold, I need to go again. You know.
I had that the other
I
day,
actually went through I had a traumatic experience with my bladder one time.
Oh,
and,
go on.
And I've now trained myself. I'm a master of that particular domain now. Yeah,
Okay.
How do you do it?
Well, I spent initially I stopped drinking liquid because I was so horrified, and I think my body my body sort of my body sort of took over from me, and I think it sort of rewired my brain because it decided that we need liquid, and so now I can pee at will or not.
Really, or not?
Yeah, I basically I urinated myself on a sightseeing tour of Seattle. I don't know if you've been to Seattle, they have an underground city. Where you actually, I hope he doesn't watch this because I ran away from the tour. It was in 2005. I urinated myself, and then I blamed a small child for it. And I ran.
A child peed on you.
Yeah. I just stood near him while I urinated myself. It's a really long tour, and you're very much trapped. And so it was. I think it was part of the experience of being trapped underground and needing a wee.
Sorry, so
Hang on, Carl. You blamed a child for your wetting your pants.
Yeah,
I'm just thinking, what kind of scenario where a child is peeing on your pants?
No, I stood near him. A puddle formed. I pointed to him and ran. Ran, legged it. And felt bad, the subsequent trauma. But then,
That's really bad. That's really bad.
Yeah, but the good came of it because I've subsequently rewired myself to it wouldn't happen now.
So maybe I just need a a really traumatic underground experience.
You need a trauma. Yeah.
I'll be able to handle it.
I mean, I'm
I'm
still.
somewhere.
I'm the guy who still needs to sit in the aisle wherever I am. So I haven't shaken that off. I would never sit in the middle. Although I did once sit plumb in the middle during The Dark Knight at the IMAX when that came out several years ago. Yeah, I was plumb in the middle, and I was nervous about it. But that was around the time I became the master of the domain. So that was, and that's a long movie. So that was a real test. But I handled it fine. Yeah.
Well done.
Oh.
Well, thank you.
Well, that's good.
You're welcome.
All right, Alex, are you ready for your question? Anyway?
Yeah, I am.
All right,
Feeling
fantastic.
really,
So in your own time, okay?
Okay, so I asked this question because it was something I really struggled with myself. So when I got to uni, I decided to make a conscious effort to be more extroverted because I was quite introverted in secondary school. Essentially following the fake it till you make it sort of line of thinking, but found that, perhaps unsurprisingly, I did end up feeling really, really fake. I got really burnt out. I felt inauthentic, and I think other people could pick up on the inauthenticity as well. I felt like I was stuck between my old introverted self from secondary school that felt comforting, but a place I knew I didn't fully want to be anymore, and the really extroverted version of myself at uni, which is where I thought I wanted to be, but felt really, really uncomfortable. I did feel like my efforts in self-improvement had come at the cost of myself, quote unquote. Thankfully, I think I sort of have the balance down now, so don't worry. But I'm just wondering, in that example, where my true self / idealised version of myself would lie. Is it the old introverted self, the new extroverted self, or the balance that I'd find a couple of years later but didn't even know existed at the time? And if it's the balanced self, how come I felt such strong feelings of inauthenticity before knowing what would eventually feel authentic?
Yeah. So can I go ahead and answer? Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
So I think I think it's neither, right? So or neither your old introverted self, nor your newer extroverted self, right? But I think it points to an interesting contrast between what I'm talking about and how people usually talk about authenticity. So usually authenticity is understood as having some sort of resonance with your own self-conception. The issue with that is that we're wrong about our self-conception a lot, and our self-conception is influenced by all sorts of things that it ought not be influenced by. So, for instance, when we get to uni, and this also can happen like collectively, which is why coming to uni is a really interesting example, right? Because you get to uni, and of course, like what people do is they feel like because I am sort of at my first year in uni, what one does is go out and go to a club or something, and when you go to a club, at least this was my experience, and I think the experience of many other people, is you realize that clubs are terrible, and like the music's loud, like there's lights, it's crowded, you can't even get a drink. There's no reason that you should enjoy being there, but for some reason people force themselves to go because they feel as if it's part of their own identity to do that, or that's what one does when one is at your first year at uni. And so the problem is that when we feel like we ought to do this, it's based on false conceptions of ourselves that we feel inauthentic about it, even though they are conceptions of ourselves and what we ought to do. And I think it's precisely inauthentic because it's based on principles that are non-rational and non-universalizable, right?
I like that.
So what I think my understanding has an advantage over this type of authenticity is that you can critique your own self-conceptions, and you come to an understanding of what it is that's authentic for Alex based on the continual self-critique of your own self-conception. And so it takes years. I mean, I don't think any of us are sort of living completely in line with our ideal selves, and so it's not surprising to me that the feeling of authenticity comes much later, and probably will continue to come as we sort of critique our own self-conceptions based on more and more objective reasons. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I really like that. It made me think about so I was like struggling with you know, you can say, oh, that person, I spoke to them and they seemed really inauthentic, or like that politician seems really inauthentic. And I was like, how can we feel like we can pick up on or inauthenticity in other people? What you said was really interesting, because it's like the reasons behind doing something, when you're projecting that you're doing it for one reason when it's actually for another. Like you said, oh, I'm going to go to a club because people around me say it's enjoyable, so I'm going to go because I enjoy it, and then secretly it's just because everyone else around you is going. Then that's an inauthentic action, because you're almost telling yourself you're doing it for one reason when maybe secretly you're doing it for another. And I guess that's how you can pick up on inauthenticity in someone else, when they're doing something for a reason that they're saying, but you suspect it's for another reason. That's when you start to think, oh, hang on a minute, that's not.
I think
okay.
And I think often you can we're quite, I mean, as Michael said, we can be quite bad at discovering stuff about ourselves. You know, we can be kind of influenced and blinkered and blinded by all sorts of things, and so we end up with this really off the mark view of ourselves. But other people might actually be far better at analysing us than we are at analysing ourselves. So I don't know, you might be going to a club and kind of, you may have convinced yourself that you're there for one reason, but it would just be obvious to others that you're perhaps a bit of a fish out of water in that example.
Or that you're being authentic, you mean? Like, are you saying that it's easier to sense inauthenticity in other people than it is yourself?
Yes, that's what I'm trying to say.
Right, Because I would say it's, going on what Mike was saying, it seems like it's almost impossible, right, to know when you're not being authentic in that way, right? Because it's that process of correcting. What do we call it? The self-conception. You know, as you correct the self-conception that you have, that you always seem to fall short, right? You're never quite right about it, and maybe that is the that sort of search for authenticity, that you can never be authentic in that way, right?
I mean, I'm really interested in when this kind of problem might start, because if you look at young children, they don't seem to have this same sort of problem with authenticity, and so it seems interesting to think about when, at what point do they suddenly kind of get this idea that how the world sees them, that they may be able to affect how the world sees them in such a way, and then they kind of, I don't know, there must be a divergence at some point when children are fairly young between how they see themselves and how they want the world to see them, you know. And I think the more that those two are allowed to diverge, the more problems you're likely to have. And then maybe the whole point of self-discovery is encouraging those two different selves to reconverge later down the line, you know. I mean, that would kind of tie in with this idea of critiquing your own self-conception.
Yeah, I mean, but I think too, like children just might have less obligations, right? So it might be the case that children just don't know what they ought to do, which means that they have less to be inauthentic about. So I think what you're saying is also true, but I think it might be the case that once we become sort of morally mature, I'll say, once we become morally mature, we're just bound by more responsibilities, and so we have more to be inauthentic about. I have more responsibilities now than I did when I was 5. I mean, nobody really expects a 5-year-old to keep a promise, for instance. And it's hard to. That's why it's hard to apply the word authenticity or inauthenticity to a 5-year-old. Those categories I just don't know exist.
And you think that it's our obligations or responsibilities that can contribute towards being inauthentic?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I mean, one of the aspects of critiquing others based on their self-conception is that I know I know what responsibilities that you have based on the fact that you're a person, but also based on the fact that you're occupy certain roles, right? So it might be the case, and this is why I think we sometimes the way that we define authenticity is sometimes slippery, right? Because what I mean by authenticity isn't that I feel really good about my own self-conception, because I might be dead wrong, and if I feel really if I think that my destiny is to be the best serial killer that's ever lived, and I'm gonna kill like the most children of anyone, and I feel that that's how I understand myself, and that's what I have to do, and this sort of authenticity is consistent with the definition of authenticity of resonance, feeling resonance with your own self-conception, but it doesn't adhere to a version of authenticity that takes on these sort of moral duties that one has, because you just can't be an authentic serial killer. You just can't, because it contradicts who you are as a human being, because human beings have duties to one another that can't be violated.
That's interesting.
Because you feel good about it. Yeah. Okay. So.
But doesn't that mean that so you're saying you can't be authentically bad? Like as a moral agent?
In the sense that I'm meaning, in the normal sense, perhaps that people think of, which is just that I'm acting, so I act in consistently with whatever principles I've adopted. So if I adopt the principle that I'm going to kill a bunch of children, then I act consistently with it. Then I'm authentic. So I can be authentically bad in that sense. Sure, I'm not denying that, but I think that you then deny a part of yourself, which is the moral part of yourself that makes that inauthentic in another sense. Inauthentic because you're denying your responsibilities to other people.
I definitely think that's quite like a philosophical sense of authenticity, because I've even heard people appeal to authenticity in a more ordinary sense to excuse bad behavior, like someone is a dick or something, and then someone else will say, "Oh, that's just the way they are." At least you know where you stand. But
I think this is equally philosophical. So this is an important point, right? This is Heidegger's. I think Heidegger's notion of authenticity. This is the notion of authenticity that I'm acting I'm acting in accordance with whatever I'm feeling or thinking at the time, right? And this is impulsiveness. This is the sense in which people give like Donald Trump the sort of badge of authenticity, right? He speaks his mind. He does he does this or that. What an authentic man. And they mean it in this sense. They mean it in the sense that.
And that's Heidegger's sense. Did you say? Okay.
But I think this comes from a certain philosophical background, and it's not just sort of commonplace language.
Yeah, So you could argue in Donald Trump's case, oh no, in fact, on a different understanding of authenticity, he isn't being authentic at all because he's shirked all of his obligations and responsibilities to behave like a good human being.
Exactly.
Someone
when Donald Trump calls immigration a disease or a cancer or an invasion, right? Yeah. What he's doing is being authentic in one sense, namely that he's speaking to principles that he's adopted about his feelings towards this group of people, but he's being inauthentic in the sense that he's failing his identity as a moral person that has responsibilities to see these people as other human beings capable of rational and moral thought. So
I like that. But, I just wanted to say, Alex, also that so I've been a resident tutor for a few years now at Warwick, which kind of involves looking after students. And in my time as resident tutor, I've had 3 students who've had some quite serious problems, and they've all stemmed from the fact that they've come to university and wanted to reinvent themselves as these social butterflies. And it just hasn't gone to plan.
It doesn't work.
It just doesn't.
It's
no.
Not,
I mean, I think perhaps you can reinvent yourself throughout your life, but it's a gradual process that probably takes many years.
Yeah.
You can't decide on the day before arrivals weekend that you're going to be a social butterfly and then show up for freshers and go on a mad one. Yeah, it's tough. It's really tough. Yeah. But I think that's a cultural problem. The fact that people come to university and think that they have to behave in a particular way, fit this social stereotype. I think that's the real issue. The fact that they can't come to university and feel comfortable as an introvert, for instance, I think that's a real problem. Yeah.
Because it's just like it's the first day at school for everyone, basically. Yeah. And I think there's just like this pressure to like, oh, you have to try and make friends like as quickly as possible. Yeah. If you make friends pretending to be someone you're not, you probably wouldn't be friends with them normally, or they straight up don't know you. So
I mean, even if they can't see through your performance, you're going to have to keep up that performance for as long as you want them to be your friends.
Exactly.
And that's going to be exhausting.
And if you're an introvert as well, which is like you recharge when you're on your own. Yeah. And being around people can be like quite draining. Yeah. And then on top of that, you're putting on a persona that's already quite draining. It's just you're just gonna get burned.
I mean, sounds like hell. Yeah. I mean, I think Sartre said that hell is other people, so I think that works.
Yeah. I mean, in Sartre, what he meant by that was that hell is the conceptions that other people have, and project onto you, right? So it fits quite well, I think. But I mean, I feel like this has to contribute to all this sort of mental illness and depression we're seeing in especially first, second years in university, 100%. Where they're not only have obligations to study, but also have all these social obligations that feel just as important as their study obligations. Yeah, it's too much to ask.
Well, I know. I forget the name of the guy now. I think his name was C.D. Lang. I'll have to check this out. But
K.D. Lang.
Is it K.D. Lang? I'm thinking about the book The Divided Self.
Great singer. Oh no, sir.
Okay, all right. Okay, I'm gonna have to check this out and put it in the show notes. But this guy wrote a very influential book called The Divided Self, where he argued very convincingly that like pretty much all mental illness, like all the way up to like really severe forms of psychosis, result from the difference between what he called our authentic selves, the selves who we are with ourselves when we're alone, and the performed self, the performance that we put on for other people. He thought that the bigger the gap between those two selves, like the more fertile the ground for all sorts of mental illness, and I think that kind of from what I've seen anyway, in my role as a resident tutor, it makes a lot of sense. Okay, are you happy to draw a line into that segment, unless anyone else has anything to say? No? Cool.
Can't believe I nearly convinced you that K.D. Lang wrote The Divided Self.
You just went with it.
Who did write? Do we know who did? Hang on a second.
Do you want to Google
Ella?
him? Oh.
Shall I
Who wrote
Google
The
it?
Divided Self? Thank you.
Robert Lang. Shall I get a
Robert
picture?
Lang.
Shall I get a picture of Katie Lang just to embarrass you?
Yeah.
You should put it up instead of the real author. See how many people
Yeah.
thinking about it.
I also,
Yeah.
I think it's,
Robert Lang.
is that the dude? Okay.
No, that's Katie Lang. You
Oh,
moron.
right. Okay, sorry.
Maybe I get a picture of her when she was younger, and then
Is that a woman?
Yes, God, what century are you living in? It's Katie Lang.
Oh, right, okay. I've just never heard of this person, Carl.
You've
I
never heard of
apologise.
Katie Lang?
No, unless she wrote The Divided Self, I have not heard of her.
There you go. Robert Lang, author of The Divided Soul.
That's the same person you just showed me.
Yeah, Katie Lang. It's Katie Lang. I'm doing it for.
He's
I'm being humorous. I keep showing you Katie Lang, and I'm saying it's Robert Lang. It's Katie Lang. She's
right.
really famous.
It doesn't help that Katie, like this person, looks a bit like a dude.
Yeah, well, I think she was a very early kind
Okay.
of.
like
Challenging
androgynous.
those.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
That's
good for her.
Robert Lang.
That's good. That's Rob.
Is
She
that
he
Katie
looks a
Lang?
bit like.
That's
Katie Lang, Carl.
That's
Oh,
Katie
Carl,
Lang.
that's Katie Lang,
Right.
who sang hits such as
I also have no idea who this person is.
Really?
I don't know.
I couldn't.
don't know.
I couldn't tell you any songs. I think she was famous for kind of not looking like a woman in the 90s, which was obviously
Yeah, a big deal.
a big deal then. Yeah. Now
I think it's cool that we've managed
Who
to
cares,
shoehorn. We've managed to shoehorn Trump into this podcast again.
Oh,
We
wow.
can't seem to
Again,
escape.
yeah.
Oh, we love him, don't
great.
we?
I mean, I feel.
He's just such
Yeah.
an interesting.
I also get asked about him
specimen.
probably every
Yes,
other
yeah.
day because I'm
He really is.
American, you know. So it's just kind of. It's just,
Really?
It's,
Oh,
Right,
man.
yeah.
In Europe and being an American, everybody's like, "So what do you think about Trump?" It's like, it's why I'm in Europe. I don't.
What's Trump like? Yeah.
Yeah, I ran away.
What do you think? I'm here, aren't I? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Carl, you want to do your question now? Happy to do that?
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Sorry. Okay. So what did I say? Give me a sec. Okay. It's like Alex's question was so long. I have to
Yeah.
skip through it. Just like. Okay. Found it. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Right. Yeah. No. Good to go.
Are you
Okay.
sure?
Yeah. It's really early. Not a morning person, you know.
It's what almost 11 where you are. It's barely the
it is,
morning.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah, that's half the working day's gone.
I know. Like I'm furloughed, so my day has kind of become.
Yeah.
I've shifted. You know. Okay, I'm good to go. So Michael.
Hang
So I
on a
like this
second, I
idea
keep
that
losing
we
you.
have about.
Can you hear me?
The authentic self would be some kind of. It's a version of the self where you're following these sort of these universal rational principles, right? So you're guided by
Carl,
something
can you hear
that
me? I think you've lost me.
is objective. You know, objectively we'd say
Hello?
it's rational. Has James gone?
No. He looks very concerned though. Where
James,
he's frozen in a very concerned
yeah.
face.
Are you there, James? Nuts.
Right. Okay, Carl. Sorry about that.
Should I go from the top, or shall I give you some
Yeah,
sort of
go
difficult
Go
editing
from-
job?
Please go for the top. Go from the top.
Okay. Okay. So, yeah, Mike. I like this idea of the authentic self being this sort of a self that acts in accordance with these universal rational principles, right? And I like this idea that being true to oneself doesn't necessarily mean acting in the way that you think you should act, but it's acting in accordance with these rational principles that we can objectively view, right? It doesn't matter who the person is; we can sort of view them objectively, right? My concern is that, isn't it, or couldn't we argue that there's a universal rational principle that would be to say act in accordance with what we perceive to be our true selves. Do you know what I mean? So I'm just thinking maybe there's a contradiction in looking at authenticity in a way that isn't necessarily in accordance with oneself, but is in accordance with some sort of external standard. And then I just, that to me, and I know we're talking about a philosophical sense of authenticity, but to me, it seems problematic that we're talking about a word such as authenticity, and we've gone far away from the everyday conception of the word.
Yeah.
And I just think maybe a problem with it is that, authenticity shouldn't be about anything, or there shouldn't be such an appeal to objective standards, and that it should be something more subjective, right?
Yeah.
Does that seem?
Yeah.
Like a fair point?
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna ask maybe a clarifying question, but I think
Sure.
so. This will perhaps bleed into James's question in a moment, but but the so the problem that you have is that you're seeing objective moral law or objective laws, objective rational laws, as something external to ourselves that then impose themselves on us. And how can one be authentic if I'm just sort of following in line with external standards?
I think that's my point. Yeah.
Okay. So the what I mean by universal laws is not more objective laws. So it might not be that these are perfectly objective, but at least more objective than our desire to eat Taco Bell at 3 a.m. But by these, I don't mean that there's sort of a static set of universal laws in the sky somewhere. Okay. That are then imposed on human beings here below. What I mean is that whatever principles that you and I adopt, whatever those happen to be, whether they be, I want to be more extroverted this year at uni, or I want to eat less fast food. These principles have to be sort of tested in a way that make them either universalizable. So that means that they can be adopted by anyone in the situation. So this is a safeguard against making an exception of myself in adopting these principles. For instance, when I want to borrow money for a loan, and I adopt the principle of I'm going to take this loan, take this money, and then falsely promise that I'm going to pay it back. So I'm not going to pay it back, but I'm promising that I'm going to, right? The problem is that if everyone also followed this principle, then no one would believe you in order to get your loan. So the act of making a loan is thereby contradicted by the universalization of that principle. So it's not that there's some static set in the sky. It's that when we adopt principles, we have to adopt them in such a way that we have rationally reflected on them, and part of rationally reflecting on them is sort of seeing if they can stand being universal laws. And if they can, then they're at least objective in a certain sense. Objective in the sense that no person would object to me adopting these principles as my own. Does that help a little bit? So okay. I don't want to say that these are sort of external laws imposing themselves on me. But what they are doing is they are insisting on a standard by which I judge the principles that I adopt. And so this means that at the same time we can say that the maxims that I adopt are my own, or I'm getting into Kant world here. The motives that I adopt are my own. So that I want to eat less fast food is legitimately my own. But it's also the case that there's a standard by which I have to judge these principles that is not my own. It's a universal rational principle. Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure. So it's a bit like like the categorical imperative, right?
Yeah.
So that we shouldn't, for example, queue jump, because if everyone jumped the queue, there'd be no queue to jump, or something like that. Right? We shouldn't murder people, because if everyone murdered someone, there'd be no one left to murder. Like, we couldn't universalize a thing, right?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. No, I buy that. But then I still want to say that one of these principles that we could universalize would be kind of the, I don't want to say desire, but that we would say that it would be a good thing, that everyone would agree it would be a good thing if the more authentic version of ourselves should be presented, and so the truer self should be presented to the outside world. That everyone would agree that that's a principle, that the sort of the internal state of ourselves. If we could be like that, if we could speak our internal monologue, then that would be a good thing, or that would be something that ought to be.
Like the baseline.
Yeah, right. And so that this sort of performance side of ourselves, if that would be completely reflective of the internal self, then that ought to be desired, right? And I would say that is one of those principles that would be within keeping of these universalizable. If that's the sort of in that sense objective, right? That it's universalizable, right?
It doesn't seem to lead to an obvious contradiction, anyway, does it?
Well, right, okay, at the least, yeah.
So
like
I think. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, you go.
Go on, Alex. Go on.
I was just going to say, it's just if it can't be applied, the implication is that if everyone was their authentic selves, it would be like a detrimental to somehow.
Yeah.
So
or logically impossible, for example.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which doesn't seem.
Yeah, I mean, I think it could just be stated as the principle to act in accordance with those principles that you've adopted, right? So it's just a general rule, and I think a universalizable one that one ought to. I mean, and you could see how this would contradict itself, because then if I adopt principles that I then have no intent of keeping, then the adoption of those principles are themselves meaningless. And so I have to, and I think this is actually part of what it means to adopt a principle in an objective sense, in a more objective sense. Is part of what that means is that this principle is binding on me, and that I will act in accordance with it. And this can be sort of said differently as I have an obligation to be authentic to the sorts of principles that I've adopted.
Right. Yeah.
So, but I think that's just part of what it means to adopt principles for ourselves, adopt principles of actions. I mean, I think that if I said, yeah, I'm gonna stop eating fast food, and then a Crunchwrap Supreme came into the screen and I took a bite, everybody would just be kind of like, okay, but you're an idiot. Like it's not what you've not actually adopted that principle, right? Because if you did and you had adopted that principle, then you wouldn't be simultaneously eating a Crunchwrap Supreme, right?
Yeah.
Can I just ask if I'm still in sync with you? Because everyone dropped out for a moment for me.
Oh. Yeah, you're good.
Yeah.
Am I good?
I didn't even notice. Yeah.
Okay,
I didn't
cool.
notice it.
I didn't notice it.
Okay, yeah. Okay, so this so is it kind of that? Yeah, so I'm still kind of a bit confused. So we've got these principles, and we want to see whether they can pass this.
God,
can you still hear me?
He was
I felt as though he was really gearing up to a zinger there as well.
Yeah.
And now it's gonna be lost.
Still there?
You can't.
That's it. He'll never reclaim the mojo.
That sounded good to everyone. Okay, so I think I was just about to ask a question.
You said you were confused.
Yeah, I am confused. I'm still confused. So so it's not so much that we're looking at whether the principle of being authentic to ourselves, say, is universalizable. In fact, it's actually kind of the attitude with which we approach other principles. Is that kind of it? So it's not, we're not considering it as a principle in itself. We're kind of considering it just a way of being true to the principles we already have. Is that right?
Yeah, I think so.
Something
I mean,
like that.
with the caveat that there's also a sense in which the principles that you adopt can be inauthentic, and in my,
Okay.
but generally, so you might call it a principle. I mean, I don't think there's any harm in calling it a principle to adhere to the principles that you've adopted. But
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
So
That's interesting.
Yeah. So but I think it might just be part of the attitude of adopting a principle. So as you said, called it an attitude. That might be closer to what I mean. So when I say I'm going to run a marathon, I'm not in the greatest shape. No.
4, 5, 6. Okay, cool. Yeah. So I just asked. So I mean, Carl's worry was that you might the principle to be authentic might perhaps be included as one of these principles that you ought to follow, and I suppose we were kind of talking about whether it is the sort of thing that we should try and universalize and thus include in those principles, or whether it's in fact almost a way of approaching the principles we already have, like adhering to our principles authentically or inauthentically.
Yeah. No, I remember now. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So do you want to keep going, or do you want me to just?
No, that was my question.
So I said that I think that it could be understood as an attitude by which we adopt principles. So I think that by adopting a principle, what I don't mean is just saying I'm going to do something or wishing that I could do something, right? So if I say that I'm going to run a marathon, and you have a good look at me and see that I eat too much fast food and lay around, you say, okay, but you can't just go out tomorrow and run a marathon. It's not going to happen. So we think that in order to authentically adopt a principle, let's say, that to do that is to hold oneself to the standard of what it means to fulfill that principle or to meet that end or whatever.
Okay. So how would that work out? Yeah, in the marathon example.
Yeah. So if I say I'm going to run a marathon and you see me sort of continue to eat fast food and not train and go out drinking and the marathon's like a month, 3 weeks, now 2 weeks, now 1 week away, you I think would with every reason in the world say, Mike, I don't think that you're actually going to do this. And I don't think that you thought you were going to do this when you said I'm going to run a marathon, right?
Yeah.
And alternatively, if I say I'm going to run a marathon and tomorrow I start to train and eat better and do all the things one does to run a marathon, I don't know because I haven't run a marathon, nor do I have a desire to. But you would then think that when I said I was going to run a marathon, I had adopted that principle authentically with the expectation that I was going to fulfill it. So I think it's just what it means to adopt a principle as my own is to hold myself to the standard that it needs or demands of me.
Yeah. In that first example, I don't know whether my first thought would be to think, oh, he's holding his principles inauthentically here. Yeah. I think I might. Like if you were saying you were going to run this marathon and it's a few days out and you're still kind of lounging around eating fast food. Yeah. I think my first thought would be to think perhaps he knows something I don't. Like maybe Maybe he's up
It's
to
a
something.
training sort of.
Yeah.
Have like an inexplicable ability to run.
Yeah, maybe. Like maybe you were like a super athlete or something, you know.
Well, what if so? Say it's me. I think I'm a good example of this, right?
Okay.
So I'm on the sofa pretty much 23 hours a day. Okay, I'm eating mainly jellied sweets, but there's some chocolate that gets thrown in the mix sometimes.
Yeah.
Okay,
Very
and yeah, exactly right. And I'm saying I'm going to run this marathon, right? I'm going to run the London Marathon, right? Yeah. And you're like, yeah, okay. And then it's 2 days out, and you're thinking maybe he knows something I don't. Okay,
Yeah.
What if I get to the start line, right? I've got my number on my chest. Okay,
Yeah.
I've got shorts that barely fit me. Okay, I put the sweatband on. I'm doing my stretches, and you all look at me. Are you still thinking, this guy knows something I don't? Or are you thinking, this is a heart attack after 150 yards? Like, this is like, surely there
run
comes...
behind him, so he can catch him when he thinks.
This is right, where's the motorcycle outrider sort of thing? Where's St. John's ambulance, right?
So I mean, I think I'd think that you might know. I'd sooner doubt myself than I'd doubt you, up until the point that you collapse and had that heart attack.
You see, I think you're saying something about yourself there. I think maybe you're incredibly naive, because I'm looking at myself on the sofa, 2 weeks out, thinking this guy's delusional. I'm not thinking, wow, what a natural athlete, I think there's a difference. I think the case stands. I mean. Yeah, that's it, right? And then some.
But then I suppose, I mean, maybe this is just particular to this example, because Eddie Izzard ran like a marathon a day for however many days, 100 days. It was something ridiculous.
Yeah.
And he wasn't in amazing shape. He said he's never been in good shape. He just said it was all up here. It was all in the mind.
Yeah.
So I continue to think, up until I saw you like go into cardiac arrest, I continue to think that you were just going to muscle through on willpower.
Mind over matter. I can just think my way through 26 miles. Right?
Yeah. That's
I've never run 26 steps. Right? Just thinking that, like, this guy, such is his strength of will. Yeah. I mean, I think you're being unfair to Eddie there, because I'm not sure if I believe he ran all those marathons. I don't. To me, it's not really possible. I think that was fake news.
But also, like, when you're eating all those jelly sweets on the sofa, I might just be thinking, well, maybe he's carb loading. Maybe he knows what he's doing.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a new diet.
Well, even if you go in cardiac arrest, like, it's just a bad day for carbs.
Yeah,
that's right. It's like he did all the prep. He was taking on like 400 and 500 grams of sugar a day. Like he had it there. He was right there.
But even when you're receiving CPR, I still might be there on the sidelines thinking, well, it's a bold strategy.
It'll come up,
let's see how it
any
plays
minute
on.
now,
Right.
minute.
Yeah, the first heart attack's the doozy. Like, once you've got that out of the way.
That's the wall. That's the wall.
Yeah. You break through it. Quick
so maybe
and on your way.
Yeah, maybe you're right. Maybe that says more about me than it does about you.
I think Mike has got a point about. I think it's still.
But I think,
despite your gullibility, Mike's right about it.
I think that it goes back to our ability to judge other people's level of authenticity, right? I mean, like it's equally irrational, I think, for like James to watch Carl getting CPR and be like, any minute now he's gonna pop up and run these run these 25 miles. He's gonna blow it all. And I think it's just as irrational to think that I'm gonna run a marathon tomorrow. It's just not gonna happen. And me adopting principles like that is I think just inauthentic. And we can judge that, I think, easily.
Okay.
We can be wrong, of course. We can be wrong, but
there's an important difference there, right? There's an important difference between the Carl on the sofa who genuinely thinks, like poor naive James, that I'm carb loading with all these, with all these sweets, right? And I'm just going to run it. Like as I'm having the heart attack, I'm like, that's the wall they've talked about. I'm doing this, and James is there with like
cheering you on.
It's like, go Carl, you've done it. You hit the wall. Just power on through. There's a difference in that between that case and then the case of where I'm sitting there thinking, God, I really need to sort of put the chocolates down and get some work done in these next 6 hours. Otherwise, I'm really going to struggle tomorrow.
Next 6 hours.
There's a difference between but to me, that seems as though there is one of those people is inauthentic, right, and the other one is just like has made a mess of his life, and, but he knows he's in trouble, right? But he's at least has a grasp on reality that means he's more authentic than the guy who's agreeing with
he's not
naive
lying
James.
to himself.
Yeah. In the same way, there's a difference between the James who is just naive and maybe uninformed about the world, and then the James who just has such a love for me as a person that he thinks that such is my sort of mental endurance that I'll somehow power through the marathon. Or the other one who's just like, oh, I'm just ill-informed about the world.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. There's some sort of difference, right?
No, definitely. All right. Unless anyone else has anything burning to say, we can move on to the third and final segment. Happy with that?
My flatmate Emily, she was gonna do a marathon. I never saw this girl train ever, ever. And she I think she had like a couple of miles to go or something, but she basically like twisted her ankle really badly.
Oh, okay.
So maybe it is possible. Oh actually, you're right. Yeah, she had a heart attack.
Right.
Yeah, she got out
in the first 200 yards. Yeah, that was going to be my strategy. Yeah.
She did say, if I hadn't had the heart attack, I would have done it. And I was like, fair game.
Probably,
yeah. Maybe it's a contentious example.
I mean, I think there are people that could run a marathon without training. I am not
without training.
But
there
are those people.
Me
out
neither.
There,
No, me neither.
It's not me.
Yeah, that's interesting. Okay, cool. Right, shall we go on to the third and final question?
Yeah.
Let me just make a note of this. Okay, so Michael, you said that if there is a true self, then it is probably some idealized version of ourselves. But, I say, when is a version of ourselves idealized? When it is fully rational and sanctified, you said. Well, when is that, I say? When it is guided only by certain principles, you said. Stable, universal, objective principles. Now, a principle is universal only if it applies in all cases. Does that mean that these true or idealized versions of ourselves are all one in the same? That is, if we each improved ourselves until there was nothing left to improve, would there be anything left to distinguish us as individuals? Now, in true philosophical fashion, I originally formulated this question with the intention of showing that your argument led to absurdity, namely that our true or idealized selves are all identical. But having thought about it, I don't think that idea is all too absurd. We are talking about standards of behaviour, after all. And don't all well-behaved people follow the same, or at least similar, patterns of behaviour? What do you think?
Yeah, so I think there's some clarifying that needs to be done. I think. So if you are a fully idealized person, right, and we're separating this sort of fully ideal part of you from whatever else there is. You're not an actual person, right? I mean, it's sort of in the definition of an ideal that it always stays somewhat separate from the actual, right?
Okay.
And so, I mean, it is the case that there are and we might not ever see or experience what it is to be fully ideal. Depending on your chosen belief about the afterlife, right? But but I think that what your question gets at is that well, look, like if we have these standards that are universal, stable, and objective, and that are the same for all of us, then it seems like whatever it is that is left after the filtering through of these objective principles is going to look the same for everyone, And that might be problematic because we think of authenticity as quite the opposite thing, right? As being true to
Variety,
some sort of individual self.
Yeah.
And so it might seem actually quite inauthentic if it ends up that my view suggests that all our ideal selves are the same. Now, I think that in a sense, it's true that our the objective, universal, stable parts of ourselves are the same in the sense that there are certain standards that we are held to, regardless of the ends or the particular projects in life we adopt. So if I wanted to be a lawyer or a carpenter or something like that, it doesn't quite matter. You're still bound by the principle that one ought not murder innocents, for instance. And this is true regardless of any sort of other life projects I want to adopt. And so it is the case that these standards are true for everyone, regardless of their particular chosen projects. And so we might think of an ideal space where everyone is just adhering to these universal standards. This is what Kant calls the kingdom of ends, right? And these are sort of our practical identities as moral persons. So they're what we're bound to, just in virtue of the fact that we're human beings that have dignity, that have some sort of status as human beings that ought to be respected. And insofar as our humanness is, of course, the same, then those standards are going to be and ought to be the same for everyone else. But there's another level that I think is different than this, and that's the level on which we adopt particular life projects. And so what's going to end up being what I'm going to end up being obligated to do is different than you or Alex or Carl, because we've adopted different life projects, or we adopted different ends. It's another way of saying it, right?
Okay.
So that you're not obligated to not to, for instance, one is only obligated to not sleep with someone else if one is married or something like that, right? So there's a certain commitment that I've made that obligates me to a certain thing, and that's going to be very contingent on the certain life projects that we adopt. And so the authentic self will end up looking different in that sense. So
with the example you gave about a lawyer versus a carpenter, are there not, if following Jimmy's, like, if we all follow because of the nature of these like collective universal like obligations, like moral obligations, are there not some jobs that wouldn't align as well? You know, like billionaires. Yeah. There's like this whole thing where like being a billionaire is I mean, it's like not a job, but like there's a moral like I don't think people like billionaires shouldn't really exist. No one needs that much wealth, kind of thing. It was like if you're in a job, for example, you strive to be a CEO of a massive like conglomerate or something. I don't know. That's morally...
Could you say that bit again? Sorry,
conglomerate.
You got really far away from your mic for a second.
Oh, did I?
You held your mic up there.
I was like, because I said a word, I was like, I don't know how to pronounce it. A massive conglomerate. A conglomerate.
I think that's right.
A big company.
A company.
A CEO of a big old company.
Yeah, there you are.
Is there not like a different... If everyone followed the same moral obligation, was working towards the same moral obligations, then there would be some jobs maybe that wouldn't align with that anymore. Do you know what I
definitely.
mean? Like,
I mean, so
like you were saying about a lawyer versus a carpenter. That was a really interesting one because I know there's some like corrupt lawyers out there.
Oh yeah, carpenters too.
And some really corrupt carpenters. There's some really, morally cool carpenters. Like I guess Jesus, he's quite a famous
good example of a
morally
moral carpenter.
kind of cool
Karen,
carpenter.
Karen's another one.
Karen
Carpenter.
Oh
the
yeah,
carpenters.
there you go.
Yeah.
Oh,
Okay. Yeah. No, but that occurred to me as well. Like, so surely there would be some projects or goals, careers that would be ruled out, like straight away by this line of thinking.
Definitely.
Yeah. Maybe even lawyers.
I
don't know.
So it's perhaps true that, and so to be clear, the obligations that we have in virtue of us just being human beings are the ones that have necessity regardless of the particular projects that we adopt. So we can't, in other words, we can't adopt projects that are in contradiction with these obligations. So it might be the case. So there are occupations or projects that are inherently contradicting to the obligations we have towards each other in virtue of us being human beings. Being a serial killer is not something that it's just you can't do that in a way that also respects your obligations to human beings.
What about people that administer euthanasia?
That's a tricky one.
So it's the case too. Again, in the lawyers and doctors, and I mean, from my understanding, people who administer euthanasia are just doctors, right?
I think you have to be medically.
So there, it might be the case that
can't be a bloke from down the pub or something.
Yeah. No.
That's what I want.
Like, oh god, yeah.
Keith, the euthanasia dealer.
Keith.
Just pull the tire iron out. I can just do this.
Yeah.
I can do it, guys.
Why fly to Switzerland when there's Keith and the tire iron?
Drugs, But no, but I think, I mean, so it points to an interesting thing, which is that in one sense, the universal moral laws that we are bound by in virtue of being human beings can rule out projects, but they also rule the projects that we adopt. And so so what might not be inherently contradicting to these universal moral laws can also become contradictory to these universal obligations we have. So being a doctor might there might be a ways in which being a doctor or being a good doctor, right, will sometimes contradict our general obligations towards human beings as persons. And then, I think in those cases we have obligations to take the more necessary one, the more necessary obligation.
Okay.
But
and so so say in the Kingdom of Ends, I'm not too clear on Kant's moral philosophy, but so say we've got some so to use your example, so we've got a carpenter and a lawyer who have both kind of achieved this ideal self.
Yeah.
So even though they would both have different projects and they'd both be doing different things on a day-to-day basis, would it be right to say that they both approach their work with like the same mindset in the same way?
It'd be appropriate to say that they're both guided by the same principles.
The same principles,
but in other words, but these principles, you have to understand, are just formal principles. So they're just the way that we adopt principles, and so the content, what might be understood as the content, is going to be different for the lawyer and the carpenter. And so what comes out the other end, right, when we've done our sort of idealizing and universalizing, is different, but they're the same principles that.
It's been through the same filtering process in a way. That's okay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So in a way that if we take the CEO, the billionaire CEO, like he just wants to do his job well, right? That's like his principle is, I just, when I go to work, I want to do it well. His job happens to be a CEO that, maybe the company is acting in some sort of way that is immoral or non-ideal. But he can still be an authentic CEO of a company that is, I don't know, causing some sort of genocide in the third world or something. But we're saying that he's still... it's possible that he can be an idealized and authentic person because the guiding principle that he has is just to do his job well, right? So
yeah,
what we're saying?
It depends on whether he's aware of the genocide, right? So if
right,
if
okay,
if doing your job well means perpetuating a genocide, no, he's not. So it depends on. I think that what it means is that we filter all these life projects through these objective principles, and so. It might be the case that at some point doing your job well was not problematic at all, but it might be the case that down the road that project comes into conflict or changes in such a way that it's now in contradiction with these general principles that we ought to be bound by. And so at that point, if one makes the wrong decision, then you are to blame for that, I think.
Okay.
But it's important to understand that sort of being a billionaire is not necessarily inherently wrong. It's the circumstances that surround that make it wrong. For instance, if we were all billionaires, it wouldn't be problematic to be a billionaire. But the fact that we're not all billionaires makes being a billionaire bound up with all these other obligations we have to people, which make it problematic to be a billionaire now, I think.
Yeah. Well, and it kind of ties into the same thing, right? That being a billionaire isn't universalizable.
Yeah.
Right. Because if everyone's a billionaire, then no one's a billionaire. The currency's worth nothing.
Yeah,
it's the same as everyone having zero money. If everyone has $1 billion, it's the same as everyone having $0. Because if I had $1 billion and so did you, I couldn't actually make you do anything for me. Like I couldn't go to Taco Bell because no one would work in Taco Bell. It wouldn't be open.
So be a billionaire and work at Taco Bell. The principle that would be problematic would be like, I'm going to be a billionaire and no one else will be, or very few others will be, right? So it's that, and I think that probably being a billionaire nowadays includes that, right? So I don't think one can be a billionaire without also adopting the principle that lots of other people are not going to be billionaires, which I think is where the problem arises. Because of course, like Jeff Bezos is only a billionaire because he exploits the hell out of other people, and that exploitation means that those people will never be billionaires or even millionaires or be able to own a house.
Sorry, I'm just looking at some of the other questions that I had written down beforehand. But I was kind of I wanted to ask about. So we spoke in the first segment about this process of critiquing our conception of ourselves, and is that kind of is part of the toolkit with which we do that critiquing? Would that toolkit involve this these objective principles? So the universalizable principle, for instance, is that one means by which we critique ourselves? Perhaps we kind of catch ourselves doing something a bit dubious, like our conscience pipes up, and is it at that point where we kind of have to maybe run our behavior through this filter to see if it's justifiable?
Yeah, but I don't know if it's the only thing that comes into play when we're doing a critique of our self-conception, because we also have obligations that are based. So universal objective principles are not based on any ends that I adopt, right? So it doesn't matter what sort of there are obligations that I have that are based on things that ends that I adopt. So I think self-critique would involve both these objective principles that ought to rule the sorts of projects that I adopt, but also there's a sort of coherence requirement as well that has to do with, for instance, adhering to the principle that I'm going to run a marathon if I adopt that principle, right? And that means that, or for maybe a better example, if a 15-year-old says that he wants to be a doctor, right? Then there's all sorts of obligations that sort of lead up to him becoming a doctor, right? He can't just go out tomorrow and say I'm a doctor. He has to hit all these sort of
like
mini,
Keith.
he has to hit all these mini obligations that are required for this end goal. And so I think that we also have to critique ourselves on these things. And of course, there's no authority other than ourselves making that call. But it's at least, it seems to me at least, irrational. And Kant says this too. Like it's irrational to adopt the end without also adopting the means. So if I adopt the principle of becoming a doctor, but then say, it's a lot of studying, I didn't realize, then you didn't really adopt the principle. You've just said, I wish I was a doctor or something like that, right?
And do you think it's then when feelings of inauthenticity might kind of sneak into the picture? If you kind of have said to yourself, "Oh, I'm going to get through med school," but then you start slacking off and whatever. Is it at that point when you start to think, "Oh, I don't feel quite authentic anymore because my goals have fallen out of sync with my my behaviour"? Yeah, maybe. I mean, that kind of makes some sense.
Yeah, definitely. I think that. I mean, there's two options. I think one is that you realize that you're not living in accordance with the principles that you've adopted, and that leads to lots of feelings of inauthenticity because you're being inauthentic to yourself. But there's also, I think, closer to what to Alex's situation, which was that you realize that the principle that you've adopted is based on all these terrible reasons for why you want to be a doctor, and the feeling of authenticity has come from the adoption of the principle itself and not the failing to adhere to it. And so in those cases, we have to just realize that we have adopted principles badly or for bad reasons. And reevaluate what sort of, or try to reflect on the sorts of reasons we ought to adopt going forward.
Okay, cool. All right. Does anyone else have any other questions for Mike, or we can do the outro?
Yeah, we might.
I felt very Dr. Philly at the end there. Yeah. I felt like I was.
It was good. It was like the closing monologue, right?
Yeah.
I felt like I fixed Alex for now on. She's
Catch me outside.
Yeah,
like sorted next.
Yeah.
Was that Catch Me Outside girl from Dr. Phil?
Yeah.
Was she?
So,
She's
okay. Have you seen her, Carl? Do you know the one we're talking about?
No.
Okay.
Catch Me Outside.
Yeah,
Catch
don't
Me
worry.
Outside. How
really
about
terrible.
Yeah.
Oh really? I'll
You're not
Google
missing
it.
out.
She was she became a meme.
She's a
Okay.
rapper now. She has like a rap career.
Yeah,
she's a
I
rapper.
actually really like her.
But she's
songs.
also
They're quite funny.
like 16 still or something. Like she's very young.
Really?
Yeah. But
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So when she asked someone to catch her outside, how about that? How old
like
was she then?
15,
Like 12 or
Like
something?
13.
Yeah, something like that.
Oh really?
young.
Oh, wow.
Her name's Bad Babby.
Bad Baby.
Bad Baby. Right.
Yeah.
She's misspelt both bad and baby.
Yeah, I know.
That's what you
She
do in a
knows
rap
that.
game,
Silly Billy.
Yeah, that's how they stick it to the man.
See, that's what's preventing me from the rap career is
Spell your name correctly.
my spelling, punctuation, and grammar is just too good.
Uncompromising.
Yeah.
All right, Alex, shall we do this outro then?
Yeah. How do I say 5 stars only? 5 stars.
Yeah. So like last time you did it, it was kind of like
5 stars only.
yeah, it was a bit too much of a directive, you just kind of be like 5 stars only. I don't know.
I think,
you can.
I think you should put a
only.
full stop after every word, like 5 stars. Only. Like, I think that's the vibe. That's the vibe we're going for. I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
well,
exactly the vibe. Yeah.
That was the issue last time. It sounded like if the listener didn't give
you
5
didn't,
stars,
I'd
Alex
come
was
for
going
you.
to come after them.
But I think that the mistake last time was it was a threat, but it was an impotent threat. What we need to do is really
You're
make
right.
sure they know.
Really,
they know.
commit
maybe if,
to it.
Maybe if they
Commit.
don't, if they
Commit
don't
to
do
the
5
threat.
stars and you mention them in the next episode, call them
Yeah.
out.
All right, yeah.
Yeah.
The
That'd be
following
great.
bozos
Yeah.
didn't give 5 stars.
Yeah. That'd be
You
good.
should do that.
I'll see if I have access
Yeah,
to
I don't
those
know if you can
statistics.
see-
We'll be like, someone in Colombia didn't give us 5 stars. You know who you are. You're the only Colombian who listens.
Yeah. So that's
All right. Well,
cursing
I mean, give it.
Spanish.
Yeah, give it. You can give it a go, Alex. If it sounds too sinister or threatening, then we can perhaps,
Okay.
we'll see what happens.
Yeah. Okay. That's it for this episode of Armchair Opinions. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you, Mike, for joining us. Be sure to subscribe and rate us on Apple Podcasts, 5 stars only, and find us on our website, armchairopinions.org, where you can send in questions for the Armchair Philosophers. Join us next time when we will be inspecting an opinion about whether it matters if aliens exist. Bye for now.
Bye.
Bye.
Are we doing the aliens one? Because that's mine as well.
Yeah, we're doing that one. Yeah, I know. It just happens that we're doing that one next.
Who's that by?
So you've yeah. That's by a guy called Dan Garner, one of Carl's friends, actually. Yeah, he's written some. He wrote an opinion on the afterlife recently, which was one of my favourite opinions ever. Really, really good. Yeah.
Was that the one about?
He's a good
I
guy.
thought it was.
Yeah.
He's a theologian, I think,
yeah,
technically.
Yeah, theologian. That'd be great to have
that's
him
cool.
on. And he says, I spoke to him. He said he's kind of like into theosophy.
Okay.
And and he's like is he like an expert on like Jewish philosophy? I think
He is,
I think that's his
yes.
idea. Yeah.
I think he has a Jewish relative or something.
Okay.
He when I became friends with him, it was because we hated the same girl in a seminar who kept saying things about the Holocaust that he found offensive, and I was like, I was saying, "Oh right, are you Jewish?" He's like, "No, but I it's like one of his granddads was Jewish or something." So it's like he took it
Jewish to be
personally,
offended by that.
and then decided to.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right,
that's what you say.
Yeah. But I think he referred to my people or something. I was like, "Oh right, I didn't realise." And he's like, "Well, no, not really, but it's just still, you know." So yeah, that's we bonded over common hatred of this idiot.
Yeah. I think that's how most people bond, to be honest.
Yeah,
Just
certainly
gotta find an idiot.
as philosophy.
That's why Trump's
undergrads.
That's how Trump's united America.
Well,
Everyone kind of.
I don't know about
Yeah.
Trump, but yeah.
Oh yeah, me and Dan are very much. We're very much Trumpian.
Is he into like mysticism though? Because theosophy is
I think
is like getting like knowing God through like ecstasy or some sort of spiritual state.
Well, that's what he said.
Yeah.
That's what he said to me when we spoke. So
I think he's into the idea of it.
yeah, I think he's looked into it
doesn't-
from an academic point of view. I don't
Yeah,
know if
yeah.
He's practiced himself.
I don't think he dances in the garden or anything.
that'd be cool if we all joined Squadcast on the recording session on that day, and he's kind of like
He's
he's
nude.
hot. He's like
Yeah.
on some psychedelics, and he's
half his body painted blue. Yeah.
yeah,
I'd love that. That would be
wearing like a
amazing.
shaman's outfit. That'd
Yeah.
be good. That'd be good. All right, cool. That was fantastic. Thank you ever so much, Michael,
yeah,
for joining
thanks,
us.
Mike.
Cool.
That was really good. And I think
Yeah, it's
actually
great.
you're one of the most prolific armchair philosophers, so I've no doubt that
Yeah.
it won't be long before we have you on again to discuss another.
Yeah,
one of
yeah.
your
I think
opinions.
that
which would be
there's
great.
a lot of good options. There's also options maybe to have two people on at once if their opinions are close enough together.
Yeah, that
that's
would
a
be
cool
cool.
idea.
That would be
Yeah,
cool.
that's cool.
I mean, Squadcast
Oh,
limits
they'll
us
do
to
that.
4. We might have to lose Carl. Yeah.
Oh, I was going
Oh,
to
you
say
can
lose
lose me.
James.
I'm probably going to probably drop off anyway, so you might as well.
But that is a good idea. We could try and figure out. Maybe me and Carl can both huddle around the same microphone, then we could have an extra person.
That sounds good.
Who knows? There are ways. But okay, that was fantastic. Thank you ever so much.
Yeah.
And I'll send you some post recording session stuff in a minute, so you know what's going on. But
let me know.
but yeah,
if you need
and
anything.
I hope you have a yeah, cool, and hope everyone has a good day. Yeah, have a fun lunch. Oh, hang on, let me just stop this. Let me stop this audio.